Welcome to Don't Be Shady, the podcast where we keep it real about love, dating, and relationships. No sugarcoating, no games, just the raw truth about red flags, boundaries, healing, and everything in between. So grab your tea, take a deep breath, and let's get into it because around here, we don't do shady. Welcome to Don't Be Shady podcast. This is episode 13. Today, we're going to be talking to a trauma recovery coach, and his name is Jim. We've been talking for some time now, so I'm really excited to have him on. We're going to really dive into some things for healing. He has a book. He's done a lot of great work in his life, so I just want to introduce him to you guys. Thank you so much for being on, and thank you so much for joining me today, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Priscilla. I'm excited to be here.
All right, so how would you describe trauma to someone who thinks it only applies to extreme experiences?
Ooh, okay. Well, there are kind of two kinds of trauma, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the shorthand I use is capital T trauma versus small t trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Capital T trauma is, you're working in your office and a plane flies into the building or, something like that. Small t trauma is something that psychologists and psychiatrists are only coming around to begin to characterize that way. Um, and this is particularly important for the work that I do with men because pretty much every client I see, Priscilla, first session, they'll tell me that either they didn't have any childhood trauma or the experiences they had in childhood were not traumatic. And by the third session, they begin to realize that they actually were. So um, as you know, there's a therapist and author out of the Boston area named Terry Real, whose work I really appreciate. And he says in one of his books, he wrote a book about, it was the first ever book about male depression called, and I love this title, I Don't Want to Talk About It.
Mm.
And he
Oh,
said,
because they don't.
because you know, and he said, to imagine that all of the thousands of small wounds we inflict on boys are traumatic is kind of like asking a fish to be able to see the water that it swims in. And so, what's important about that is that those things are cumulative, particularly when they begin to happen, early in life. Um, it actually, science understands now that it actually physiologically wires circuits in the brain. And so, as adults, men who have undiagnosed or unhealed childhood trauma uh, tend to deal with it in a bunch of different ways without consciously realizing that they're dealing with recalls of traumatic events. And so you see men, getting into drugs, getting into alcohol, having affairs, doing high adrenaline kinds of activities. Um, it's and by the way, not everybody who is an alcoholic, not everybody who likes to ride his mountain bike on the side of the mountain at night, you know, is a victim of childhood trauma. And a lot of men who have not dealt with those childhood traumas act out in those ways. And one of the things you and I have talked about is in the US, men are 49% of the population, and yet we're 80% of successful suicides.
Wow.
Now, to contrast that with women, women are much more likely to be victims of what I would call capital T trauma. And I use the example of a plane flying into the building. But, for example, if I get five women together in a room, statistically, one of them has endured childhood sexual abuse. Whereas, if I get 20 men in a room, one of them will have been a victim of childhood sexual abuse. So 20% of women versus only 5% of men. Why is that important? Because that's such a big T trauma, sexual abuse as a child. Women are far more likely to be diagnosed with PTSD and to seek the kind of help that they need to overcome that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We teach women from the time that they're little girls that it's okay to cry, it's okay to need emotional support, it's okay to be weak, it's okay to be sad. Whereas we teach boys that none of those things is okay for them. right?
Yeah.
And so, women are much more likely to present with, um, if you will, psychological symptoms, right? I'm depressed, I'm sad, this horrific thing happened to me when I was a little girl. Whereas men are far more likely to hide that trauma, not only from the people around them, but from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And Terry Real calls that covert depression, right? Depression that is hidden from even my own consciousness. And he says that the only way out of covert depression is overt depression, which is what happens when a man can no longer contain that in his subconscious mind and it explodes into consciousness. And that's where the disconnection, the alcoholism, you know, the porn addiction, all of those things that on one level or another are an explosion into consciousness of the hurt and the desperation that a man feels. And, because we teach men it's not okay to be sad, it's not okay to be weak, we guys are much more likely to present to our primary care physician with physical symptoms. Doctor, sometimes I get so nervous, so frustrated. My chest is tight. I have a hard time breathing. What's wrong with me? And the doctor will do a battery of physical tests and go, Jim, there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe you're a little bit stressed. Take some time off or do something like that, right? But so it addresses a symptom of what is actually a psychological problem, not a physical problem. And so that
Mm.
psychological problem continues to go undiagnosed. I get more isolated. I get more angry. I get more frustrated. And eventually, a bunch of us kill ourselves. And, those statistics don't account for everything that really could be suicide. What I mean by that, I use myself as an example in the book. I self-soothed with food. Food tasted good to me. Food didn't judge me. Food made me feel good, made me feel loved, all that kind of stuff. And I ballooned up to 407 pounds, ended up in a cardiologist's office on a Friday, okay, with
Mm-hmm.
him telling me that he needed to put some stents in my heart Monday or Tuesday. By the way, I was getting ready to leave on Saturday to go spend the holidays with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you're not. Because he said, if you have a heart attack, it's not going to be mild, it's going to kill you.
Wow.
Now, had I had a heart attack because I had self-soothed for so many years with food, would that have counted in the suicide stats? No, but it would have been suicide, absolutely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Over a long term. So I think those numbers are even higher than the statistics reflect. And the other thing is when I was doing the research for the book, and I'll shut up and let you ask questions in a minute, Priscilla. When I was doing research for the book, I looked into those statistics in other parts of the world. And what I found was that they were pretty consistent no matter where I looked. At least three-quarters or more of successful suicides are men. And it works out to one man every minute of every day, someplace in the world, kills himself.
Wow.
And that's a frightening thing. It's a very frightening thing to me. And so, I
Yeah.
spend my time working with men who have childhood trauma to help them A, recognize it, B, confront it, and then C, heal from it.
What's the name of your book again? Remind me.
Called Echoes of Broken Skies. It's on Amazon.
Awesome. So I'll put that link in the
Yeah.
chat when this episode's over. But I think that'd be a really good read for the audience.
Yeah.
Also, too, how a question for broken men in relationships.
Yeah.
So, as men, obviously they get older. You just described all of those. That's mind blowing to me. But you described it perfectly. How do those same men navigate romantic relationships? Because, from my perspective, being with a broken man like that, it's almost like I become the mother that they
Mhm.
craved or didn't have because when there's arguments that happen, they're not healthy arguments. They're like almost childlike arguments, the silent treatment, the breaking of things, the freaking out, tantrum like style. But
Yeah.
as someone that has, never really experienced that, or maybe I just didn't understand it, I'm trying to come from an empathetic place, trying to be understanding and there, but it's almost like it got worse the more understanding, the more empathetic that I became. Like, what does that look like for women who are in these situations trying to navigate these type of men? Do you understand the question? Hopefully, I'm explaining it
Yeah,
right.
no, I
Okay.
understand. I
Okay.
understand the question, and my answer is maybe going to be a little bit complex. I mean, the first thing
Okay.
the first thing is um, to recognize, and you sort of implicitly said this, to recognize that it's not about you, right? When a man acts out like that and has an explosion or, whatever in an argument, it's not about you. It's about something buried deep, deep, deep inside. Um, the second thing is, and this is part of the healing process that I work with my clients on, when you have that kind of an outburst, right? When some traumatic experience gets re-triggered, mom was never there for me, she always yelled at me, whatever it is, right? When that gets re-triggered, you don't, you, the guy, don't have control over what's going on, right? Neurophysiologically, what happens is it's called an amygdala hijack, right? It's not a term of art. What happens is, the amygdala is evolutionarily ancient part of the brain that triggers the fight or flight response, right? Or fawn or freeze, but typically fight or flight, right? And there was some research done at Harvard Medical School in I think it was like the mid 1990s, where they took trauma survivors and came up with some statements and some, they interviewed them, came up with some statements and some questions that they wanted to ask them that would trigger a traumatic flashback, right? Obviously, very controlled environment. They put them into a functional ARI machine and they began to ask these questions. What did not surprise them was that the right side of the brain, which is where the limbic system, where the amygdala is, lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. What did surprise them was that the rational part of the brain, the left side of the brain, almost completely shut down. And, why is that important? Well, it's important because on the left side of the brain, there are two areas in the brain, one on the right and one on the left, that are involved in the production and comprehension of speech. So on the right side of the brain is an area called Wernicke's area, which is involved in the comprehension of speech. On the left side of the brain is Broca's area, which is involved in the production of speech. So what they found with these trauma victims is that, and I'm a perfect example of this, right? They can often recall a traumatic incident as though they're looking at a photograph, but they cannot tell you how they felt.
Wow.
And so, once I give an example in the book, Mother's Day 1970. I'm going to be I'm going to be 65 here next month. So that's 55 years ago, something like that. I was just about a month shy of my 10th birthday. My father and I were washing our station wagon in the back of the house. It was an old Chrysler Town and Country, sort of forest green with fake wood paneling. It was morning. I remember where the sun was coming. I was on one side of the car, Dad was on the other. Something triggered his anger. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember pretty much anything he said to me except, remember this day, Mother's Day 1970. So it's 55 years later. I remember Mother's Day 1970. I can see that like I'm looking at a picture. I cannot tell you, except generally I'm sure I was upset, but I cannot tell you how I felt when that happened, right? So, a couple of things. When the amygdala hijack happens in that argument in your relationship with your partner, and he starts to act out in whatever way it is that he starts to act out, and, you feel like you're having to mother him and he's looking to be mothered in the example that you gave. And the less that he's feeling mothered, the more he's getting triggered and he's not in control. He's just not in control, Priscilla. And I would wager to say that some of those partners that you've had, that that kind of thing happened, that, a half an hour or an hour or half a day later, they might come back to you and go, hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't, like, I don't know what was going on there, or I shouldn't have yelled at you, or, some version of regret and remorse for what
Yeah.
happened, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So the work that I do with my clients on that is the only way to deal with an amygdala hijack is to head it off before it happens. And so I teach my clients to just in the course of the day, begin to notice what's going on in your body. I got a big smile on my face, my head is high, my chest feels open. Oh, I'm happy, you know, or I've got butterflies in my stomach and some tension across my shoulders. Oh, I'm nervous, right? So to begin to create some body awareness just in the course of your day so that you know what that feels like, so that you can begin to recognize the bodily sensations when you are on the brink of getting triggered. And at
Mm.
that point, and this takes a lot of practice, right? At that point, being able to stop, take a breath, evaluate what's going on in this particular moment. No, I'm not in danger of having my ass chewed off by a saber-toothed tiger, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not about to be sent to my room for being a bad little boy or whatever the situation is. So take a moment to recognize what's happening and now to give different language to that experience. And we haven't talked about the importance of language in trauma healing, but we will. Let me give different language to that experience so that I can now come to you as a more emotionally mature man and say, hey, Priscilla, I'm upset about ABC. It's really not about you. When you say, why didn't you clean up that mess you made? It triggers a memory of my mom, and she was always giving me a really hard time. So you're right. I need to clean up my mess, and I'm sorry about that. But, that's a different thing from, why are you badgering me about this? I'm making up the scenario, right?
Right, exactly.
Um, the language piece is that what we understand, I think I said this already, what we understand now, or what scientists understand now, is that particularly in those kinds of traumatic incidents in childhood, the experience neurophysiologically wires certain circuits in the brain. And so when the triggers come, those circuits are already there to light it up on fire right away. The only way, literally the only way of changing that wiring. And again, this is not sort of an airy fairy woo woo discussion. This is hard science. The only way to change that wiring is to give different language to the experience.
Mm.
What I just described, right?
Yeah.
Priscilla, when you gave me a hard time for making a mess and not cleaning it up, my mom used to do that all the time. I understand that's not what's going on here. I should have cleaned it up. Whatever, whatever, whatever. So I'm now
Yeah.
responding to rather than reacting to the
Mm.
situation,
Yeah.
right? Responding to much more conscious thing, reacting to very much unconscious trigger. Does that
That
make sense?
makes no, it makes a lot of sense because my mom is always like on time, get dressed, do this, do that. And as an adult, if like I wasn't on my way somewhere or I was not on time, I would start getting anxiety, like sometimes panic
Sure.
attacks
Sure.
because of that. I was being triggered by my child, my mom. I could hear my mom, hear my mom. And as an adult, she kept doing it and would keep doing it. And I remember I had to sit with her and tell her, I'm not a kid. If I'm going to be late, I'm okay. I don't have to be on time just because you are.
Yeah.
Please stop doing that to me. You're causing anxiety. You're making me anxious. I'm having panic attacks. You have to stop. But thank God I have a relationship with my mother where I can express that to her and we can have that conversation because now, yeah, she still says her little snide little comments, but she's not texting me and calling me, where are you? What are you doing? Have you left yet? Like, that's not the conversation anymore. Now I'm like, I'll see you when I get there. And yes, I may be late. Just so be prepared. I'm not going to be on time probably. And if I am, I'll see you then. If not, I'll see you after, but I will be there. But
Right.
I don't thank you so much because that has really, it's really helped our relationship moving forward as adults. And I don't also feel like a little kid anymore having to like, oh my God, I'm about to be late.
Yeah.
I'm freaking out. But that's real true, what you said, you know?
So, yeah, so there's one minor tweak that I would suggest to what you
Okay.
just said. Okay. Nobody can make me feel anything.
True.
This happened. I feel this way. So it's not, mom, when you're pestering me about not being late, you make me anxious. It's, mom, you're harassing me about not being late. When that happens, I feel really anxious. So please be aware of that. I'll manage me. I own my feelings, and I want a healthier interaction here between us so that I don't feel anxious. Because I don't like feeling anxious when I'm talking to you, mom. I really don't. Right? You see the slight little difference in what I'm saying, right? It's
Yeah.
owning my own feelings and being responsible for how I respond, react. Got nothing to do with that other person because they can't control anything about how I am, just in the same way that I can't control anything about how they are.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, absolutely. Because I remember, you know, like with my previous partner, there would be arguments, and then the silent treatment would happen, and then I would remember when he would be in trouble or there'd be some sort of punishment, he'd get sent to his room. There'd be no conversation. They wouldn't interact with him or talk to him. It was like that's how he would get punished. So if I did something wrong, I was getting punished in the same way. And I'm
Yeah.
like, but you're an adult. You have words. You can express yourself. Like, what is going on here? Like, you're not that little kid anymore. We need to have a conversation. If there's something that I'm doing that you're not liking, let's talk about it. It's not probably going to change overnight, but we can still keep continuously having the conversations.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never in my life been with somebody who would do that. And I think the longest time was like 2 weeks. And I was losing my mind.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my, I was like, I might as well just leave the house at this point. Like, they're not going to talk to me. Like,
Well,
why be
and
here? You know?
did he,
And I did. I think I left for 3 or 4 days or something.
yeah, did he have any awareness that he was acting like he acted when he was a little boy?
I don't know. And that's the thing. I don't know. Because I would try to have the conversation. It was like he was very forthcoming with the information. But as far as
Mhm.
working on those things, there was, oh no, I am not going to therapy. There is nothing wrong with me. So, so I don't really know if he was aware or not
I'm
aware. I
not going
don't.
to therapy. There's nothing wrong with me. No, I'm going to wager that he wasn't.
Yeah.
That maybe intellectually he could recount experience. You know, it's like I told you that the first session that I have with every man that this is held true with every single man I've worked with. Oh, no, 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 no. I don't have any childhood trauma. Yeah, I had some stuff happen when I was a kid, but that wasn't trauma, right?
Yeah.
And, the reality is that it has an impact and it has a long-lasting impact. Going back to the example I gave you, if I get five women in a room, one of them has been sexually abused as a child. That's in your face. That's not something that gets repressed or can stay repressed for long. Getting told that I'm lazy, that I'm, not working hard enough, that I'm not smart, that, whatever that series of things was, go to your room and shut up. That doesn't seem to stack up against something like, I was sexually abused as a little girl
No.
from the 6 until I was 13.
Right.
But the accumulation of all of that leaves a deep scar nevertheless. And in some ways, I'm not doing comparison here between the two. Please understand that I'm not. In some ways, that's as or more insidious because it's so hidden, it's so pushed down that when it finally explodes, a lot of guys stick a gun in their mouth, right? That, the sexual abuse is PTSD. We understand a ton about PTSD. What we're only beginning to understand is what's been labeled complex PTSD. That's a term that's only been, come into existence in the last 15, 20 years in the fields of psychology and psychiatry. And complex PTSD is exactly what I've described, the accumulation of multiple small wounds over an extended period of time, often at the hands of a parent or a caregiver over a long period of time in childhood. And that's, equally as devastating as big T trauma. I say more insidious because it's harder to diagnose and harder to bring to the surface. I don't have any problems. I was fine as a kid. What are you talking about? Right? Yeah.
Not so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wish that, or I hope that more men start to realize these things, talk about these things so they can heal themselves, so that they can have more prosperous relationships with the people that they say that they love. Because a lot of times what ends up happening is they end up hurting and breaking down the people that they say that they love. And it's traumatic to the person that's in it. And then we have, once we escape, essentially, we're
Mhm.
having to seek trauma. We're therapists. We're having to do deep dives in ourselves because we've been so mentally involved in that situation that it's just it's traumatizing for us. And then here we go, going into therapy, doing all the work and all. Again, I can only speak for myself, but doing deep stuff for myself and realizing that yes, I'm not perfect, but if I would have been healed, I guess you could call it. Maybe there's a better word for it. But if I would have been a healed person, I would have never dealt with a person that way for so long because I would have been able to recognize it and see it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, because I didn't
Yeah.
recognize it, I didn't understand it.
Yeah. No, I understand that completely. Two things I would say about what you just said. First of all, I'm trying very carefully to choose my words here because I don't mean to imply that one is more important than the other or anything like that. I really
Right.
don't. But what a gift that you're depressed, you're upset, you're traumatized, and so you go seek therapy. We don't do that because we don't realize we're depressed. We don't know that we're victims of trauma. We don't know any of that stuff, right? I, I think I told you this once before. Piece of research where, well, two pieces of research in particular. One where researchers got together some 24-hour-old babies and they selected them to be of similar size and build and whatever. They brought up a bunch of adults to look at these babies. They told some of the adults that these babies were girls. They told some of them that they were boys. The ones who believed they were looking at girls described them as prettier, more fragile, things like that. Whereas the ones that thought they were looking at boys, same babies, 24 hours old, 24 hours old. The ones who thought they were looking at boys described them as stronger, bigger build, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we treat boys extremely differently from how we treat girls from birth. Another piece of research, I think it was a 9-month-old baby. The researchers filmed this baby playing with some toys, a buzzer goes off, baby starts to cry. Same kind of thing, told half the adults that this baby was a boy, told half that it was a girl. The ones who thought they were looking at a girl would say things like, oh, poor thing, she's so upset, somebody should pick her up and comfort her. The ones who thought that baby was a boy would say things like, what's the matter with him? Boys don't cry. Why is he so angry? He needs to open up.
Wow.
Okay. So, so many things wrapped up in that. Terry Real says that we assume femininity in girls, but we confer masculinity on boys. And because we confer it, we can withdraw it. Right. So Jim is a guy's guy. Everybody wants to be like him. He dates all the pretty girls until that day in high school when we have to shimmy up a rope in gym class and Jim can't do it. And then he's
Mm-hmm.
a pussy and a faggot and, all that kind of stuff. So I just went from being, the guy's guy to being a total reject. We
Wow.
don't really do that with women, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so a lot wrapped up in there. It would be a gift if more men could recognize the suffering that they're going through for what it is and seek treatment and therapy and healing for that. Whereas it's more likely that women will do that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't keep harping on the statistic, 4 times as many of us as women will kill ourselves.
Yeah.
That's that's terrible.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I don't know, just
yeah.
in my home, it was just always if you need to talk to somebody, if you don't want to talk to me, we can get you a counselor, we can get you a therapist, whatever you need. So I always heard that growing up. So I've never frowned upon therapy or trauma or counseling or any of those things. I've always been very open to it just because it was always offered as a child. So, and I think that maybe that stems from my dad being in the military because they really harped on them getting therapy for their PTSD and all the things. And maybe it just kind of trickled down from us to my mom. Because I know my mom, her family, they don't talk about how they feel. They didn't even tell each other that they loved each other. My mom
Mm,
told me the other day that she didn't get told that she was loved until after she had me, like
wow.
22, 23. Her parents never told her that they loved her. And I was like, how did that make you feel? She's like, I didn't feel anything about it because it was normal for me. I was like, so then how did the language change? She's like, well, when I met your dad, he was always telling me he loves me, always told you guys that he loved you guys. And you guys would always say it to me. And as a mom, like, okay, well, it was normal. So I just would start saying it because at first it was very uncomfortable for me to tell you guys I loved you. But,
Yeah,
as I did it more and more and I realized it was okay, then I was okay to say it. But I was just like, wow,
yeah.
that's wild to me because I say it to my kids all the time. I say it to my mom. Me and my mom say it all the time. So I can definitely understand, changing the language and learning a new thing, breaking those things, even something small as I love you.
Well, and even something small as I love you coming from a man, right? If it's, well, I'm not going to qualify it. Coming from a coming from a man, I love you is expressing an emotion that I've been taught since childhood is not okay for me to do.
Wow. Then how do you, as a man, then how do you pursue love if you don't know how to love?
There's a whole other podcast. No, I
I
seriously,
agree with
so
you 100%. No, I agree.
yeah,
This is a very huge subject
yeah,
around childhood trauma, being an adult, learning about yourself, the emotional state. Because before I went through this relationship and had to seek therapy, I never really addressed my own feelings. I hated feeling, for a better word, I hated feeling stupid. Like, I don't want to go into something and then come out and look stupid. Like, I have very recently realized that that is my issue. I don't like going into something, believing in somebody, believing that we're going to have this amazing life together, and then it all crumbles. And I've
yeah,
put in so much effort, and then I come out looking stupid. But that's not actually what happened. You don't come out looking stupid at all. It's just the way that I was referring to it. But then when you
yeah,
change the
yeah,
way you look at it, you're like, oh, I did not. That was a lesson. That was an entire lesson that I just learned right
yeah,
now, you know?
absolutely. And coming out of it feeling I'm so stupid, I will tell you is grounded someplace in your childhood too, right?
Oh, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
And so being able to look at it differently, give different language to the experience. Oh, no, no, no. I learned an important lesson there, blah, 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 blah. This is what we're talking about, right? The other thing that I would say is we come into relationship not always, well, I was going to say not always for the right reasons, but that's not what I mean. Not always aware of why we're coming into relationship, right? And well, so I have two clients. One's a guy, one's a woman, right? I see them each individually, and I also see them together sometimes as a couple because they are a couple, right? And they are in this journey in their relationship where they were in relationship, it ended, they've come back together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I
And
I recognize that one.
and the thing about it is that doing the work together, they are both uncovering the things that have driven the bus of their lives that came from their childhoods. And I mean, literally, Priscilla, like I said, let me tweak your language a little bit ago. Literally, sometimes I'm coaching them about how to speak to one another. And
Yeah.
I've told them over and over again, some of this feels really stilted and artificial in the beginning when you begin to practice it. But I want you to get into the mindset of being conscious about what's going on, what's yours, what's not yours in terms of the feelings, and how do you respond to your partner if your partner says or does something that triggers some sort of adverse memory for you, and so on and so forth. And I've said to them, would that every couple coming into relationship with one another would do the kind of work that you guys are doing at the front end? Because you know what? Now you're entering into this relationship consciously and you understand what it is that you're seeking in this relationship. Because the other thing that I would say is that every single relationship you've been in, Priscilla, and this is true for me too, every single relationship, regardless how it turned out, served you in some way,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Whether it was reinforcing things that you believed consciously or unconsciously about yourself, whether it was, a particular wound that needed to be surfaced, and God, this other person was the perfect person to surface that wound for me, you know, whatever it was, right? You came into that relationship for a reason, right? Now, as far as the men go, when I get into a relationship and, on our third date, I'm going, oh, I love you.
Ooh, that's weird.
I, I don't know. Okay, sixth date, 6 months later, whatever it is,
Yeah.
whatever it is, I love you is you are filling a need for me. And it feels good and it feels comforting and it feels, whatever, 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 right?
Yeah.
I would argue that true love ain't about that. I mean,
Nope.
it is about that and it's about other stuff as well,
It's
right?
deeper. Mm-hmm.
It's deeper. It's deeper. And, really like emotionally mature love, I'm there, baby. I'm there beside you, good, bad, otherwise. When you have a crappy day, I'm going to hold you up. When I have a crappy day, you're going to hold me up. Sometimes I'm just going to be there and shut the hell up because you don't need me to fix what's going on. You just need to know that I'm there supporting you and vice versa. And by the way, I'm not, a love guru. It it took literally until 2 years ago when I met my present partner to realize some of these things, right? And with all the work I've done, with the stuff that I do, I've learned things from her that, I just didn't understand before. I've been married twice, Priscilla. Neither of my wives ever told me that I was handsome or sexy, and she tells me all the time.
I love it.
I've been I've been married twice. Neither of my wives ever said, "Hey, there are times when I can tell that something is off with you or something's on your mind, and I ask you what's going on, and you tell me nothing, or you tell me you're okay. I'm your partner. I'm here to support you. Ask for help." Right? That's a kind of love that I never experienced before, and that I'm learning how to give as well as receive.
I love that for you.
Well, yeah, I love it for me too.
It took two
Yeah.
tries, but hey, we got there.
Well, my point is that, when I entered into relationship in the past, it was to fill a need, not consciously. I really believed I was in love, and on some levels I was, right?
Right.
But I really was looking to fill a hole or more than one that I didn't know how to fill for myself. And so,
Self
no
love.
surprise. Yeah, self-love.
You
Oh
know,
God.
people talk about that so much, but I have friends that ask me because they've seen my journey. They've seen
Yeah.
me like this past year, and they're like, "Oh my God, like you've transformed so much. You're such a different person. Like, how do you love yourself?" And I was like, "Easier said than done." I said it takes a lot of self reflection. It takes a lot.
Yeah.
You and you cannot love, and I never really understood this, but you cannot love someone else unless you love yourself, and it's 100% true. A
I,
hundred percent true.
yeah, absolutely.
Because
I,
this person would never deal with the stuff that I dealt with in the past. And like you mentioned, all of those versions of me and all those relationships that I had needed to happen for me to be here. And
yeah,
I'm grateful for this person. So
absolutely.
I'm not mad at all. I am not mad at it, now that I've done the work. But before I
No,
was crushed, heartbroken, and
sure.
all the things. But now I'm like, whew, that was a nice ride. Okay, what's next?
Well, and learning to love yourself is on a very fundamental level, learning to know yourself, right? To really, really know who you are. My my second wife was a gift in so many ways. Um, she was the person who introduced me to the Mankind Project, which we've talked about before.
Yeah.
She was the person that encouraged me to, go through the trauma recovery coaching course, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When she divorced me, when she left, as you know, I live in southern Baja, Mexico now.
Yeah.
Not a place that I ever envisioned coming to, came here with her dream. Now all of a sudden she divorces me, goes back to Seattle, and here I am.
You're like, wait a minute.
Well, and so, when I say loving yourself is also about knowing yourself, I went through a conscious process of, oh shit, I didn't choose here. Do I want to be here? What do I like? What do I like to do? I like listening to live music. Well, do I like listening to live music? Or did I do that because she liked listening to live music? You know,
I went
I
through that
like
too.
I like trying different kinds of food. I grew up Italian, pretty much Italian menu day after day after day, right? Nothing wrong with that. I like trying new food. Is that because I like that or because she did? So I mean, literally at that level, going through, and I don't remember how long it took me. It wasn't a day, but it wasn't a year of getting to this place of being able to know myself well enough to know that, hey man, I love it here. I love my life here. I like who I am here. I like who I am in my friendships here. I like who I am in my relationship. Man, I'm cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it started with learning who I was, which seems strange that it took me 63 years, 62, 63 years to get there. And it did. And thank God I got there before I'm 6 feet under.
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
want to thank you so much for, joining me today on this episode. It was a beautiful conversation. Me and you we could sit here for 2 hours and talk. It's just
Yeah, we
great.
could.
But if you have not yet checked out his book. I'm going to go ahead and link that so that you guys can find it. Please send me the link, Jim, so I can send everybody to your book. Again, thank you so much for showing up today and giving me all this amazing advice, because some of that stuff I'm going to use for myself. But, again, the work is never done. It's linear. We're going to keep doing the work so we can keep getting better. Right. And again, thanks for joining me today, and you have an amazing day. And if you have not yet, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and join me on all my platforms. Thank you so much, and you have an amazing day.
You too, Priscilla. Thank you.
Bye. All right, that's a wrap on this episode of Don't Be Shady. If you laughed, nodded, or said, even once, go ahead and follow, leave a review, and share it with your crew. Slide into my DMs on Instagram, and let's keep the convo going. And remember, keep it cute, keep it classy, and don't be shady.